Great. Well, thank you, Boulder County Bar Association, and thank you everyone for joining us. I guess we have nothing better to do anyway. So I'm Kurt Hofgard. I'm with Hofgard and Associates in Boulder. I've been there for, I can't believe it, 26 years. And I'm going to start out with talking a little bit about the Secretary of State's rules on the notary, and I'm just going to hit the high points. But before I do that, maybe I'll let the other presenters go ahead and introduce themselves too.
Hi, I'm Mardi Moore with the Law Office of Mardi Moore, and I have an office in Boulder and one in Denver as well. Specialize in wills and trusts, probate, some elder law, particularly guardianships, conservatorships. And I'll be talking about some of the statutory requirements around the execution of various documents we often use in estate planning and sort of how that intertwines with these new rules that we're operating under on an emergency basis. So I think we were thinking Kurt will start with 10-15 minutes on the rule, then I'll talk about some of these statutory requirements on wills, powers of attorneys, things like that. And then we'll have Susan come in on some technology stuff. And so introducing Susan Bateman from CMIT Solutions. Susan, take it away.
You're muted, Susan.
I think you're muted, Susan.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm here to teach you how to use Zoom. My name is Susan Bateman. I work for a company. I'm an operations manager for CMIT Solutions. We provide IT support in Denver, Boulder, and the Chicago area. Been doing it for years, since like 2002. Before that, I came from a small company called IBM. I worked with IBM for years. But I was asked to join this call today and talk a little bit about Zoom. So I'm going to do a quick Zoom tutorial. Anyway, thanks a lot for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'll try to go through my part fast because I think you've all have probably seen this, but I'm just going to hit the high points. So as you all know, Governor Polis actually had put out an order allowing for remote notarization. So, and the Secretary of State adopted these rules March 30th, and I've tried to share the screen with everyone. Hopefully that's coming up for everybody so you can follow along. And I also, this was included with your materials sent out beforehand. So some of the high points, and I've actually been doing some remote notarization, and even though it's a little bit burdensome, it works pretty well, I think. So this doesn't deal with actually electronic signing. I've had that question before. It's like, oh, so this means somebody can sign something on their tablet or computer. No, this is audio video communication. So you're sitting there as the notary. You actually have to watch them and see them do everything that's going on here. You cannot do it outside of Colorado. That's my understanding, or for somebody outside of Colorado. Some of the other things, I think we'll get back to wills. That's kind of a little carve-out piece that we have to deal with in this. But some of the high points, you have to be able to verify the identity of the remotely located individual and any required witnesses by means of personal knowledge or satisfactory evidence of identity. I'm going to put aside the question of witnesses for a moment. We can have a good discussion about that, I'm sure. Here's a big one that you might have missed. You have to record the interaction such that the verifications may be clearly viewed at a later date. I had one where I did not press the record button, and that was a little bit embarrassing, but fortunately I caught it quickly and went back and recorded it. And it's not too hard to do on Zoom. Maybe Susan can give us some tips on recording on Zoom a little bit later. I've been using Zoom, but you don't have to use Zoom, of course. All right, some of the other high points and low points. Okay, notary must determine, notary must determine from personal knowledge or satisfactory evidence that remotely located individuals appearing before the notary public by means of audio video communication is the individual that he or she claims to be. So that can be done with the driver's license or other identification. That's a remote presentation of a government issued identification and the data contained on the identification of the remotely located individual. What I've been doing in my notarization ceremony is we set up the Zoom conference, we start it, and then you actually have to have the consent of the parties to be recorded. So I ask them beforehand and get their affirmative consent that they consent to be recorded. I start the recording, then I ask them again so that it's on the recording that they've consented to be recorded. This one's kind of interesting. The certificate of notarial act for remote notarization must, in addition to complying with the requirements of section blah, 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 indicate that the notarial act was performed using audio video technology. So you actually have to put this on the document. You have to change your notary block. And there have been some discussions on the listservs with the Colorado Bar on good forms for that. I have one that I'm willing to share in a little bit too if people want to see what I've been doing as far as actually changing it. So you have to change the notary block on your documents for these kinds of notarizations. All right. So when you start it up, first disclose to the remotely located individual the fact of the recording and the details of its intended storage, including where and for how long it will be stored. So what I usually do is just start out the recording, get the consent of everyone to be recorded, introduce everyone by full name, the date, the time, where they're located, city, and then we get the consent to the recording and the storage of the recording. So they have to also consent that it will be stored. I just usually read this sentence, that we're securely storing the recording for a period of 10 years in compliance with section blah, blah, blah. Audio video recording must contain at the beginning a recitation by the notary public sufficient to identify the notarial act, including the name of the notary public, date and time of the notarial act, a description of the document or documents to which the notarial act relates, the identity of the remotely located individual, his signature will be the subject of the notarial act, the identity of any person who will act as a credible witness if required to identify the signer, and the method or methods by which the remotely located individual, any witnesses if required, will be identified by the notary public. This one's important. There should be a declaration by the remotely located individual that his or her actions before the notary public are knowingly and voluntarily made. So don't skip this part. That's a very important part. And if the remotely located individual is identified by personal knowledge, and an explanation by the notary public as to how the notary public knows the remotely located individual and for how long. So those are the main requirements. We'll go down a little bit more. So you go through your whole ceremony, list each document. My understanding is the camera's got to be aimed right at the document. You got to see that signature go on the paper. So some people have issues with that, but eventually they figure it out and aim their camera down so that you actually watch them sign it. So once it's done and you've stopped recording, this is the procedure there. After the notary public performs the notarial act, the remotely located individual must transmit a legible copy of the record by fax, email, or other electronic means directly to the notary on the same date that the act took place, and the notary public must notarize the transmitted copy of the document as soon as received and transmit the same back to the person. So this is something to emphasize too, to say, okay, right after you get off here, you have to go ahead and scan or take a picture or something and send those to me immediately. And then I have to notarize those, sign it, scan it, and send it back to you. So that's the requirement. Now, one extra little piece, if the record is a will, it's a little bit different. The original signed record must be presented to the notary public within 15 calendar days of the date of the remote notarization. And within 3 calendar days of receiving the signed record, the notary public must confirm that such record is identical to the record remotely notarized under Rule 5.2, and if so, affix the notary public signature and seal to the original signed record, reflecting the date of the remote notarization. So Will's got to do a little bit more with the will. And finally, notary public must record all remote notarizations in his or her notary journal. So those are the high points that I see. You know, I encourage everyone to really read the whole set of rules thoroughly and be acquainted with them. I just have the rules with me every time to the left here. Every time I do notarization, it's kind of I think of it like a checklist, or you know, this is your recipe that you go through, and just make sure you hit each point so that it comes out the right way. So that's what I have on notarization. I had one other possible point of discussion, and something that might be helpful to people. Here, let's see if I can bring this up. We have started in our documents to actually put some language in powers of attorney. And let's see if I can bring that piece up. Well, it's not coming up, but basically we're starting to put some language in our healthcare and financial powers of attorney that will allow the agent to actually communicate by explicitly by phone or audio-visual conferencing. So, you know, in this time of social distancing and everyone needing to stay in their homes and work from home, same goes for agents that are acting for financial or healthcare affairs. It's great if they have the explicit permission to actually communicate with doctors or hospitals or financial institutions by phone or by email or by Zoom or video conferencing. So that was a little piece that I had. I think that should have come through in the handout, some of the language that we use for that. So that's all I have. So thank you. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Marty. I'm going to unmute myself or mute myself. Marty, I think you have to unmute yourself. Not yet. There you go.
There I am. Thank you. Sorry, I was also making a note of that very good suggestion you made right at the end about including that power and the power of attorney. So one of the documents that I provided is just my checklist, very much on the topic that Kurt just covered. So I wanted to mention it briefly. That was my going through the rules and coming up with kind of just a step-by-step guide for my clients, which has helped to make these remote notarizations go a little bit easier. So you feel free to throw that away or use it whole cloth, or pick out what is helpful to you and leave the rest. So moving on to the statutory requirements, for me, when I realized we're not going to be able to do these things exactly the way that we usually do in best practice form, to have 2 witnesses and a notary in most situations, I just decided to just really woodshed with the statutes and go through and say, well, this might not be best case scenario, but what do we have to have just as a bare minimum to get a valid document executed. So that's what I did. I went through and found, you know, what we normally do with 2 witnesses and a notary is going to create a self-proving will, but maybe the best we can do right now is valid will. So in order to be valid, the will has to be in writing and signed by the testator, and then either signed by 2 witnesses or acknowledged before a notary. Just having it signed before us as notaries in this remote procedure should be sufficient to create a valid will. We don't have to have those 2 witnesses. And then of course, if you can't even do that, you know, a holographic will is not the best, but can be kind of the fallback position, is maybe to kind of help a client understand what they need to do in order to create a valid holographic will. So what the heck does self-proving mean? I honestly wasn't sure. So going back through, understanding that it's got to be signed by the testator and the two witnesses, and those two witnesses must be in the conscious presence of the testator. And those two witnesses have to swear before the notary as to the testamentary capacity and the absence of constraint or undue influence. So my understanding of that is that if you do have a situation where you have two people who can serve as witnesses who are living in the household with your testator who's signing, that should work. Is you can take the, you can notarize, you can swear and notarize the witnesses just as you can the testator. And then those two people are in the conscious presence of the testator. And so therefore that should create a self-proving will. There are some in the bar who also think that it would work if the two witnesses were with me rather than with the testator. I don't think that that will work because I don't think that that meets that conscious presence requirement that we have to have under 1511-504. I didn't put this in here, but then it's like, well, okay, we have some people at home who can be a witness. Does it matter if they're a beneficiary under the will? Because I, for some reason, was thinking they couldn't be self-interested and still be a witness. But I went to 1511-505, and I see that anyone who is qualified to be a witness can be a witness to a will. So anyone that you could admit into court as a witness could be a witness to this will. And that being an interested party under any part of this document will not disqualify them as a witness. So then I thought, who the heck can be a witness in trial? Then I find 1390-106, which actually says anyone over the age of 10 can testify in trial. So I don't think a 10-year-old is a good witness, probably in most cases, but if you have older teenagers home from school, college students home from school, they might be able to serve in this capacity. Then we did talk about already, Kurt talked about, oh, and then also I want to point out, Shelley Merritt had pointed out the 1512-406, which tells us regarding the presumptions in formal proceedings and what really the value of having a self-proving will is. The only time a will being self-proving is going to really make a difference is if we're in a formal proceeding, because we don't need witnesses in order to admit a will to informal probate. So therefore, it's only in those formal probate matters. And then whether or not it's self-proving tips the presumption back and forth a bit. So take a close look at 1512-406 to better understand the limited importance really in most of our practices of self-proving a will. Then I've got some stuff there about transmitting the will under emergency remote notarization rule, which Kurt already covered. Then a medical power of attorney, there's really nothing in the statute that says that that has to be witnessed or notarized. So even though in my practice, we've always done one witness and a notary, I think if you can do that with just a notary, that's going to be valid, even if they just sign it without a notary. It may be, it might look funny to someone trying to rely on it, and they may be nervous about it, but I think that that does create a valid power of attorney for medical purposes. 1514-705 talks about execution of the power of attorney for financial matters, that can just be signed also by the principal. If it's notarized, it also creates a presumption that that's a genuine signature. So good to get that notarized, but again, doesn't have to be witnessed. Advance directive is the toughest one. That's 1518-106, because specifically under that statute, it does have to have 2 witnesses, and those 2 witnesses have to be very specific people. They can't be a physician, can't be an employee of the physician or a healthcare facility, can't be a beneficiary of the estate or an heir of law, ad law of the person signing. So that one is very hard to get if in most situations that we're under right now. But I started digging, and I just thought, if I'm just in a really bad situation that I really need to try to help this person communicate their desires regarding end-of-life care, if you look under 1514-506, and that's really talking about the medical power of attorney, the Colorado Patient Autonomy Act, the legislative declaration really talks about encompassing all of those wishes. And I'm sorry, that's under 504. But under 506, it also says that the agent has to act in accordance with the wishes of the principal if those are known. So I'm thinking, if we can get a valid power of attorney, and I can have the client complete that advance directive, that is instruction to the agent under the medical power of attorney. So even if that advance directive isn't binding, it is giving that instruction. There's at least some guidance we're giving to the person who's empowered and has that responsibility under the medical power. So I would try that if you can't get an advance directive and you really need that power. Then just talking again about the transmittal requirements, if you're not talking about a will, realize you under that rule, you must transport on the same day electronically those other documents back and forth. You can't, it's not optional. It's not just, oh, I'm doing a will anyway, he's got to mail me all of these, let him just put those powers of attorney in there and I'll deal with them the same way. You cannot deal with them the same way. They have to be treated differently. And then finally, I got this notary block from stealing from everybody on the community discussion board. Everybody was putting up different notary blocks and different suggested language for doing this. So I just kind of cobbled together what I thought was going to work for my practice, but you can use that, or certainly use whatever you come up with yourself, or whatever you also steal from one of our wonderful colleagues. So that is it for me. I have nothing else. I will hand it off to Susan.
All right. I'm going to keep my video off. It's distracting for me to try to present when I'm looking at myself talking. I'm sure some of you could feel the same way. I'm going to go ahead and share one of my screens. Okay, so I'm going to go through this presentation. There's 20 slides, so I'm going to have to go a little quickly, but you will have access to this presentation after this. So I was asked to just give kind of a tutorial on Zoom, and we've all been thrown into this, what, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's a lot of different tools out there that you can use, like GoToMeeting. Microsoft Office 365 has a product called Teams that works very well with this. So that's what, as an IT company, that's what we're using. But a lot of our clients are using Zoom, so I'm familiar with Zoom too. So the agenda, we're going to talk about how to sign up if you don't already have an account, how to schedule a meeting, and then you can also start just kind of a meeting on demand, an ad hoc meeting. And then also we're going to talk about all those meeting controls that come up when you hover your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, and how to record a meeting. And then just, you know, as you guys have probably seen in the news lately, there's been a lot of security issues with Zoom. So they've issued some security updates to their software as well as recommended changes to the settings. So there's a lot of these, so you probably will want to have a copy of this presentation, but I'll go over them really quickly. So the first thing you do to sign up is you go to zoom.us and you click on plans and pricing. And I think there's 4 different plans there. The ones that probably apply to us are the free or the personal account and the pro account. Probably the pro account because you can record your meetings. So I think the free account you might just want to do if you're having some happy hours with your friends far away. The free account you can host, it has most of the same features as the paid account. You can host up to 100 participants. But with that, if you have more than one person in the meeting, it's limited to 40 minutes and it'll just cut you off. So just be aware of that. If you have a free account at the 40-minute mark, it'll just stop the meeting. But you can have unlimited one-on-one meetings. So again, you know, if you were just meeting with one person, it's not going to cut you off at 40 minutes. The pro account, which is what we have, is about $15 per month per host. And again, you can host up to 100 participants. There's a lot more administrative control, and you can also record these meetings. So once you set up your account, you can go to zoom.us again and click on sign in and use your email address and the password that was set up when you registered. And it's a pretty easy product. You can click on schedule a meeting to schedule a meeting in the future. And when you click on that link, it'll bring up a form where you can put in the topic, a description of the meeting, the date that it will happen, and the start time and the duration. And then there's a few other things that I would recommend, like for the video settings, is just go ahead and turn that off from the get-go. Just as people are entering the meeting, it's not quite as distracting. They can still turn on their video after the meeting starts. There's an audio setting that's like to use a phone or to use your computer audio. I recommend, again, leaving that to the default, which is both, and that gives the attendees the option of using, you know, their cell phone or an office phone or their computer audio. And then once you save this newly scheduled meeting, there'll be a link to copy the invitation, and you just click on that link, and then you can paste that into an email to send the invites to your attendees. And then when you launch the meeting, and you guys have probably all seen this, is it pops up the options for your audio. The computer audio is if you have, you know, I have a webcam that has a mic on it and I have separate speakers. If you don't have that set up, you might want to select phone call. The other thing, almost all of us have a smartphone, and you have, you know, you have your mic and your video camera on your phone, right? So you can actually download the Zoom app and do this on your phone if your computer's not set up to do this. And if you click on the phone call, you'll be presented with a bunch of different dial-in numbers. You know, probably the first time you saw this, it might have been a little confusing. What it means is you could just use any of those numbers to dial in from a phone. And then once you connect, you'll be prompted to enter the meeting ID and then your participant ID, which will identify you as you. Let's say you're talking to a client and they need to see a document, or they just want to meet with you, kind of impromptu or an on-demand meeting. You can click on that as you log into your Zoom account, hover over that host a meeting, and you can quickly click on, you know, a video meeting, just an audio meeting, or a screen share. So this might be good if you're working on a document and you needed to show your client, you know, what you're working on. You can click on that host a meeting, screen share, and then open up the Zoom meeting. And the next thing that will come up is you'll need to tell them either your personal meeting ID. You can actually change that. If you don't want to use your personal meeting ID, you can change it to a different number in your settings. And then also on this screen, when they join, when you set it up, you can click on invite others, and you can email the invitation to them if that's more convenient. And then what they would do is they would go to zoom.us and enter your meeting ID that you've given them, either via, you know, verbally or via the email invitation. So pretty easy just to start a meeting on the fly. So as you're sitting there in front of your computer or your iPad, or you can move your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, and what will pop up is what's called meeting controls. So on the far left, if there's not a red line through the mute, that means that you're not muted. So if you click on that, it toggles it on and off. So as you can see from the beginning of this meeting, I didn't do that. So I was muted and I started talking. So anyway, you'll do that once or twice before you get it right. Same thing with starting and stopping your video. You know, you might want to make sure you don't start your video if you're not prepared to be seen. One thing that I recommend is if you're the host, I recommend clicking on Manage Participants and then the chat. And that kind of puts that into a sidebar on the one side of the screen. And you can actually drag that to a second screen if you want to, or drag it anywhere. But that allows you as the host to be able to see the list of attendees and also be able to mute or mute all. You know, or if somebody, you can hear some background noise, you can see who's maybe making that noise and you can mute just them. And just know with the chat feature, you can chat either one-on-one with somebody that's in the meeting, or you can chat with all participants. And the other thing in the meeting control is you can share your screen. And when this comes up, it sometimes could be kind of confusing. Like I have 2 monitors and it'll say share monitor 1 or monitor 2. And then there's a bunch of other tiles in there. These are all my running applications. So if you share just the application, it won't allow you to kind of get out of that and show something else in another screen. So you'd have to stop sharing and then share either screen 1 or screen 2, if that makes sense. And then down there too, there's the button to record the meeting. We'll talk a little bit more about this a few slides from now. One thing that happens too, I just slipped this in here because I was just on a call the other day and a couple of people had some awful audio feedback. You've probably been on meetings where this has happened, where it kind of goes wah, 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 wah. And for the presenter or the host, it's a bit distracting. So you might want to let them know to go ahead and click on the mute, the little arrow to the right of the mute button, and maybe leave computer audio. Because what happens is you join the meeting with computer audio and then you later get on a phone call, you later dial in. So that causes some feedback. So you want to be on one or the other and not both. Otherwise you do get that irritating feedback. First time, this was a couple years ago or several years ago, I was on a meeting, a client had started using Zoom. Zoom was just emerging at the time. And I can remember being on the call thinking, well, how do I get out of this meeting? It just wasn't very clear at that time. But again, you hover over, you to pull up the meeting controls, and in the lower right, there will be a red link to end the meeting. And you, as a host, you can end the meeting for all, or if you're a participant, you could just click on leave meeting. You can also share a file. This might be handy to with some of your clients. What you do is you launch the chat box and then you click on the file and you locate the file on your computer. It uploads it and then the person on the other end can click on it and download it. But be careful, if you just wanted to share it with one person, make sure the 2 is not set to everyone. So again, you can, just like you can chat one-to-one or chat with everyone, you can share a file with one person or with everyone. And then to record a meeting, again, you need to have one of the paid accounts. You can record it where it is stored on your computer or it's recorded to the Zoom cloud. Either one's fine. I would think that you'd want to record it to your computer and then save it to some kind of archive location. I think Marty had mentioned Dropbox. We also recommend a service that's similar to Dropbox, but I think it's a little bit cheaper and it's more fully featured. It's called Ignite. You can go to ignite.com and check it out. But anyway, you can then copy the recording to one of these services where you could save it for the 10 years that's required. I would just very caution you not to just save it onto your computer, because if you've ever had a hard drive crash, you can feel that pain. So you never have it in one point of failure. So if you save it locally, make sure you also save it into some other cloud archive service. So what's come up lately is this concept called Zoom bombing. It's very irritating. Knock on wood, it hadn't happened to me yet, but it's when somebody that's uninvited joins your meeting, and usually they'll do something like throw up some kind of screen or say something inappropriate, or, you know, just silly stuff. It's not like, you know, it's just disruptive, and it's illegal. So you can report it to the FBI. What happens is, you know, there's all these Zoom links you've seen of zoom.us/ and then a link. Somehow some of those get out either via Google search or somebody sharing them. And that's how they can join into these meetings. And so what's happened is Zoom quickly took some steps to further secure their product. What they did is they set the meeting password by default is set to enabled. I would make sure that that's on in your Zoom account, and this is in settings when you log in there. And I would also disable the embed password in a meeting link. Again, so what that means is if you send out the link, it embeds kind of the encrypted password in it so that you can just click on that one link to join. But that's, again, a security issue. So I would set it up where they have to manually enter the password before entering the meeting. And the other thing that's was set by default to be enabled is this virtual waiting room. And you all experienced that getting onto this meeting today, where you're put into a meeting room, and until the host allows you in, you can't come into the room. So this is a great enhancement. They've had it for a while, but it was not set to enabled by default. And also Zoom programmatically has disabled the ability to scan the internet for meetings to join. And then there's a bunch of steps that you can take to secure your Zoom account. Just make sure that you have required a meeting password for all your meetings. So don't make any meetings public. And make sure that the virtual waiting room is enabled. When you get a copy of this presentation, you can click on this link. It's like about a 5-minute YouTube video about how to make sure this is set up and how it works. It's a pretty good video, but we just don't have time to go through it, but I wanted to keep it in here. Also goes without saying, don't share your Zoom meeting links with anybody because it's a security risk. Then there's a bunch of things in settings. So it's when you log into your Zoom account, on the left, along the left side, you'll see settings. So just go in here and make sure that these are all set this way. And I'll show you towards the end of this presentation how you can change these on the fly if you have to. But you want to set the screen sharing to host only. So coming into this meeting, since we had 3 presenters, this wasn't set up this way because we needed to everybody share their screen. You also want to disable the remote control. You know, it'd be awful if somebody got onto my computer right now and started clicking around and changing things. And disable file transfer. Again, somebody can transfer some file that's nefarious. They also recommend to disable to allow participants to rename themselves. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you can actually, if you go in it and your name's not right, or it's just first name, you need first and last name, on the fly, you can actually rename yourself. But if it was somebody that was doing something bad, they might rename themselves to Mardi Moore, and you wouldn't know that it wasn't Mardi Moore because they've joined as Mardi Moore. The other thing, again, is to disable the join before host. So this allows the host to go ahead and let people in from the meeting room. And then if you remove somebody, you want to make sure that you've disabled this for them to get back into the meeting after you removed them. So again, these are all in settings. And then there's a bunch of other ones. Is just enable the mute upon entry. Again, it's just kind of distracting if you're trying to have a meeting and you hear all these beeps and people talking as they're coming onto the meeting. And then you want to enable the meeting control toolbar and also the waiting room, and then require a password when scheduling new meetings. The other thing too, that because of Zoom made all these changes, the software needed to change too. So there was an update that came out earlier in April. And I think they may have come out with another one since I did this screen snapshot here. So just make sure, like, you run your Windows updates, you want to make sure that the Zoom software is updated too, because a lot of the updates include, the latest, greatest security enhancements. So one of the things that the latest update added was a new icon. So if you've been using Zoom for a while, this may have been new to you. If you see the security icon down in the bottom in the meeting controls. And so this allows you to lock the meeting, from people coming into the meeting. You can also turn off the waiting room. So from my screen snapshot here in the presentation, it's enabled. So, and then the shared screen is turned off. But if I wanted to, like right now, I can click on the shared screen and it will turn that back on. And you can actually turn off chat too. I've been in some really large meetings where chat was turned off, just again, because there were so many people in it. But anyway, check out this new security icon in the meeting controls. So that's about it. I think they were going to share the presentation. If you want to, you can also send me a note and I'll email you the presentation. Or if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. Oops.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I guess at this point, Kyle or Laura, are you there?
I'm here.
What do you usually do at this point? Do you take questions like right off the screen, or do we do it off the chat? What's usually the best way?
Usually both. There's, again, to anyone who's listening who would like to ask a question via audio, if you just press your space bar, that will unmute you. You can ask your question and then remute yourself if you don't mind. Or if you just have a question you want to drop in the chat box, you can just send that to everyone as well. So I know one came in. I returned to I said the slides will be available after the presentation. I'll send those off with the CLE form. I know Mimi had the question, can you go over sharing screen? What do you need to have a document? What do you need to have a document accessible as there is no browse button? So I think that's just like when you go to that screen sharing function, like how does that work exactly? That may be a question for Susan.
Yeah, if you mouse down towards the meeting controls, I think everybody could see the share screen. So when you click on that, you have the option to share like your entire monitor, which will share basically everything that's on your computer. Or let's say you had a PDF file that you wanted people to see, you could click on that. So when you click on the screen share, it brings up a lot of different options. So again, it could be kind of confusing at first, but I would open up the Word document or the PDF document first before your meeting, and then it'll be ready. When you click on the screen share, you should be able to see that in all the different options, which will be a bunch of different tiles, and just click on that one PDF or that one Word document. Does that answer the question? I would suggest, I would suggest finding a friend and having a test meeting with them and playing with it, because some of this stuff is not intuitive and some of it's a bit nuanced, with how to use it, but make sure the screen share is turned on and just get a friend or a co-worker and have a meeting and try these things out before you do the real meeting.
So I see another question regarding sharing files in a Zoom meeting. How secure is that? Would you recommend only sharing documents with no sensitive information? My practice is don't share anything sensitive in a Zoom meeting, but they have increased their security. I know I just started using the lock meeting. I think that's a really good one, but my default is just don't share any social security numbers, financial information, as much as possible in the Zoom meeting. That can be done over the phone. That's my approach.
So I had one question about one of the participants had heard that the Secretary of State might be issuing some clarification to permit the witnesses to be present with the notary as opposed to with the testator. And I'm just not aware, I haven't seen anything about that. I'm just going with what the Secretary of State's office has at present issued. If something else comes out, then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I've not heard anything about that. I have a question for Susan, if I could. Susan, you mentioned that you could use either the audio on the computer or with the phone. If I've got someone on my phone for the audio and on my computer for the video, I'm thinking that's not going to record. Is that right? I won't have the audio. If I record that, I'll only have the video?
You have to use one of those dial-in numbers that pop up.
But then if I do that, if we're doing that,
It's
then
recorded.
then we will still have that on the recording.
Yeah.
Okay.
But don't just call them, have them call your cell
Got
phone.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, here's a question. Can you please explain DAN for electronic notarization? Also, is there a notice intent to notarize form? Maybe Marty understands this better than I do.
I don't understand that either. I think it's talking about the virtual signing sort of thing. Is that what that question is?
Or maybe I have seen this in conjunction with talking to your malpractice insurance. So I do recommend everyone check with your malpractice carrier, make sure that they're not going to somehow exclude the remote notarization. And my carrier was okay with it. I checked with them, but that's a good thing to do. What is the difference between logging into Zoom through your internet browser versus downloading and using the app? There appear to be different options available with the app. Maybe Susan understands that one.
Yeah, you would log into your Zoom account via zoom.us online to change settings, to maybe schedule a meeting, to start an ad hoc impromptu meeting. But then once you start that meeting, it launches the Zoom app. So the Zoom app is what you use to carry out the meeting. Does that make sense?
Here's a good one. Is Zoom HIPAA compliant? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Yes. I don't know.
Yeah, I just Googled it when I saw that question, and there is a document on a site called HIPAAjournal.com. I guess I could put this in the chat box. It talks about it and signing a business associate agreement, but I don't think that Zoom by itself is HIPAA compliant. I mean, it is encrypted. So when you're using Zoom, and that's one of the things that it's supposed to be, but it's, yeah, you might want to read this document. And that might shed some light on this, but I'll share this in the chat.
So we had a question about the will. When you're notarizing a will, someone said, do you have the signer transmit it to you electronically, then notarize it and mail it? No, I think you have to have the original, both the original signature and the original notary stamp on the same actual document. And that's the difference between a will and anything else. So what we do is get, after we've drafted it and gone back and forth on the various versions, and we finally have the one that we're going to have him sign or her sign, I either, if they have a printer available to them in their home, I just email the PDF to them and say, print it out. That's what you're going to sign. If they do not, then I mail the actual physical copy to them a few days before the signing. Then we go through the process of the meeting electronically where they sign it, I see it. If we have witnesses there, they witness it. Then they have to get that physical document back to me. It's either, they probably, for the most part, everybody's mailing it, but if someone was able to, they could drop it off at my office. Then once I get that physical document, it has to get to me within 15 days, and it has to be the original one that that person signed. Then I make sure it's the same one that I sent to them, because when I mail or email it to them, I write on the top of it, as soon as I've done, I said, this is the version, this is the one I sent to this person on this date. Then when it gets back, I make sure it's the exact same one. Then I stamp it and then put it in a will, bind it in a will folder, the whole usual procedure, and then send it back out to them. So that there is that original document with the signatures with the stamp.
All right. I think we hit the substance of most of the questions. I guess I can wait a couple more minutes unless I missed anything.
Does anyone have some really cool tips to share? Because I think we're all learning from each other right now. If anybody wants to, you know, unmute, I think they can unmute themselves and just say, hey, here's an idea.
Because again, if you'd like to unmute yourself, just press your space bar and that will unmute you. And then you can chime on in if you can.
Is Zoom ADA compliant? There's a good question.
Ah, don't know that one.
I don't either.
I would love, if somebody knows about that, I'd love to see a CLE on that. Because I know we have to make sure our websites are even ADA compliant. And that's very confusing to me. I have no idea about that.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see so many people in one place. Here's one. Does a third party ever need to see the video recording, or does the notary block language to take care of that?
So I think what's required under the rule is we have to record it and then secure that recording just like it was our journal, right? So it's not, nobody else is supposed to see it, nobody else is supposed to be using it unless it gets subpoenaed, or I think there's some rules for the actual signer to be able to see it, things like that, but you just treat it like your log. And then also, I think Kurt mentioned this, but you have to also enter it in your log. You won't have the signature of the signer, but you need to make a note in your log that it was done by a remote process.
All right, here's one. Is anyone doing remote online notarization for documents other than wills after becoming an e-notary with the Colorado Secretary of State? Right now I'm only doing estate planning documents, but I don't know if anyone else is actually branching out into other documents.
Right. I think any notary can do this process that we're talking about, as long as the notary is in Colorado and the person signing is in Colorado. I think there's a bit of an apples and oranges thing because there are these platforms that are only for remote notarization. They have their own notaries. And since it's always me doing these meetings with my own clients, I haven't dug into those services very much. I don't actually even know if those are permitted in Colorado. And the concern has been that they sell, some of them, maybe all of them, sell personal information. That's their business model, and that is not permitted in Colorado. So that's the one caution. If you're going to check into those types of services, I would make sure that they are, look at what the rule says about not, securing information, not selling it, not allowing anybody to sell it, and make sure that that system is compatible with that, is in compliance with that.
Here's one. Does this mean that witnesses cannot participate remotely via Zoom, GoToMeeting, and must be in the physical presence of the testator?
That's the hot question that some of us are arguing about, but I believe that the witness must be physically present to meet with, where a will is concerned, to meet the statutory requirement that they be in the presence. Other document, now for the purpose of establishing the identity of the person signing it, not establishing testamentary capacity, but for a self-proved will, but for under the notary statutes of saying, is this person who this person says he is? you can either use that driver's license. If they don't have that, you can also use, instead you can use personal identification. So that witness is addressed in this emergency rule. And that witness can be in the presence of the notary, or could be in the presence of the person signing. But that's a different question than for witnesses to a will, in my humble opinion.
I would say, to be safe, I wouldn't try to have a three-way Zoom meeting with the witness over here and the signer over here and you over here. That's just my opinion, just to be safe.
Say this though, what harm does it do? I mean, if you think about it, if you otherwise have a valid will and adding these witnesses that might work but might not work, might make it self-executing, might not, but
That's
might.
true.
Does it hurt to have them on there? I don't think it invalidates the will. It may
No,
be.
that's true. Maybe just if you have to do it that way,
Right.
it probably could pass. Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't think it will pass, but I don't think it hurts to try.
Yeah.
Throw everything you got at it and something.
Right. In these times, it's just kind of like MacGyver, you kind of hook
That's
put
yeah.
things together and,
Right.
hopefully that'll work.
I agree. All right. Does this mean?
Well, I think we've hit our time. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and thank you to the Bar Association. Thank you very much, Marty and Susan, for presenting today. And we'll see you at the next great thing that the Boulder County Bar is doing some great CLEs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kurt. And then I just want to verify to everyone, I will send out any additional presentation materials that they mentioned. As a notary, I'm looking forward to seeing that remote notary block you guys mentioned. And then the video recording of this will be up on the website, hopefully by early to late afternoon today or tomorrow morning at the latest. And if you have any more questions, feel free to send them to me. And I'm sure Kurt, Marty are also available if they have any questions. But again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Marty, Kurt, and Susan, for presenting today. Excuse me.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.